Good evening. My name is Jake Green, and this is my video that is dedicated to really going over the basics of my diversity plan for EFD 552. Overall, the video is going to consist of two main parts. The first part is going to be a general discussion of the importance of diversity in the high school setting, and then the second part is going to be a screen capture where I go through my presentations on the specifics of my three-step diversity plan for Piedmont High School. First off, I just want to say that my outlook on diversity has changed a little bit thanks to this class. Initially, I thought diversity was one of those things where lots of times the educators and admin get into a little bit of a lull where you're saying, well, I need to make my class more diverse for the sake of it just making more diverse. For example, let me explain. One of my robotics classes I had last year started out with around 3 girls, best I can remember, and we wound up narrowing down to just 1. And so, you know, it was one of the things that I really kind of felt for her because she felt extremely out of place in the class because she was the only girl in the class. And so, you know, I kind of had that mindset of, you know, I could hear people saying, we need to add more girls to that class to increase diversity. And I just took it as a negative aspect of, oh, great, now so I'm going to get more kids in here, more students that may or may not have an interest in robotics just for the sole fact of increasing that gender diversity in the classroom. Now, upon studying the book that we were assigned to study and several of the reflective parts of it, I really began to appreciate how important diversity is for the classroom. I always try to go back to an ecosystem kind of point of view. That's what I teach is biology. So, you know, the more diverse an ecosystem is the more healthy that it is as far as a ecosystem level health. Now, if you break it down into microsystems, it might be a little bit different. But in general, the more diverse an ecosystem is, it is an indication of the more healthy that ecosystem is. And so I kind of look at it now, you know, with this kind of hindsight's always 2020, that diversity is actually a key part to having a healthy classroom. And so, you know, that when this assignment was assigned, I was trying to figure out ways to really get some baseline data. That's one of the things that I really believe in is if you can get good baseline data to start a project with, you at least have a target to go through. And so throughout this video, I'm going to try to keep it only a few minutes. We're going to go through my keynote that I created to summarize the diversity plan. And one of the biggest things that is pushed out right now is the ACT. It is the end-all, be-all gatekeeper for collegiate level education in America. And so, you know, I know not all students are going to go to college, but at the end of the day, the ACT is the most important test that a student is going to take, if you ask a large majority of educators, including myself. So, what I decided to do was break down the ACT scores for Piedmont High School and see how it kind of fell along the lines of how diverse our class is and how diverse our pedagogies is, and honestly, how people of diverse backgrounds, whether it be poverty or socioeconomic status, which is basically poverty, also gender, race, and whatnot like that. And so I really found some good trends. One of the most important we're going to go over here in a few seconds. So I really try to keep it simple. I love to follow that process. So I appreciate you tuning in to watch this video. I hope our diversity plan makes a lot of sense and has the ability to change the outlooks of educators like myself, and also provide opportunities for students to where they can excel in the ways that they see fit the best. So thanks once again, and now we're going to move over to the more intricacies of my diversity plan. All right, so to start this off, I would like to go ahead and just say thank you once again for tuning in rather. And so we're going to kind of work through this the way that I would try to present it to faculty members. And so in general, the title of the plan would be the ACT Intervention and School Diversity Plan. First off, I'd like to just say, you know, that the main goal is to develop that dialogue that's going to take place between stakeholders in the community and also in the school, because that's what it really boils down to, is that dialogue. And so what we really want to do is improve those ACT scores for the students. How we're going to start off is by looking at baseline data. And so I've really got 2 aggregations of different sorts of data that's based on the ACT score. One of those is going to be a small sample of the student body to kind of look at, you know, basically what our makeup is. It's a little bit skewed in the one direction. We'll go over that in a second. But I still think some valuable trends can be noticed. The second one is just an aggregation of the total scores throughout the whole class of 2019, and it really just kind of shows what their averages look like. All right, so first off, this would be our sample A of class of 2019, where I just took a group of students and broke it down. Basically, this was the group that I had in this sample, and I went through and color-coded them to indicate their socioeconomic status and their racial background. So the ones that are not highlighted, i.e. the ones that are just still white, are going to be largely white students of a middle to upper class socioeconomic status. Most likely going to be in the middle of the road. We'll have one or two of these students that would be considered high economic status, but most of the time they would be in the middle of the road. As you can see, their scores vary some. If you can notice, the student that is let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 down, had some really low scores in English, and their score is relatively low to 16. Now, flipping over to the color coding, the yellow ones are going to be white students that are in a low socioeconomic status, and how we indicate that is by free and reduced lunch status. And so, as you can see, the yellow ones are highlighted as such, and their scores are honestly pretty high. If you'll move on to the next color band, which would be the orange color band, this would be students of color that would be most likely lower economic status. They're free reduced lunch. I know sometimes that free and reduced lunch might not be the best indication of true home socioeconomic status, but that's what I'm going by here. So, like I said, the orange ones would be our students of African American race that are in the free and reduced category. If you'll notice that their scores are relatively low. Now, the blue band is a unique individual. It is the only one. He is the only one in this sample that would be a African American descent that is in the middle to high economic class. Like I said, I'm just going by what materials were available to me, and it might not be the most accurate representation of true home socioeconomic status, but if, by all means for this study, this student would have a high economic status. Now, the green is going to be a Hispanic student that is in the lower echelon of socioeconomic status, and that's pretty much that statistic there. I know the sample size is relatively small, but I wanted to keep it small that we could have just a few number of students to look at as a test group to see if this would be something that would be feasible. All right, next we have the aggregation of all the scores across the 11th grade this year. You can see that the average is 17.2, and what was amazing to me about this was how much deviation there is between each individual student. Now, granted, I understand that each individual student is a unique individual, but it is amazing to me to see the deviation that occurs. Now, right below the arrow there, you got a small group of students that are clumped together, and I would like to break this down and get exactly who those students are and what background they have. But for the purpose of this, I wanted to see the deviation between the students as a whole to see if, well, obviously we're underperforming some students, and in this case it looks like, you know, everybody just performs completely different, and it shows a great deal of deviation. So it's going to be one of those things where it would take a lot of time to really sit down and delegate it out. So that's actually where we're going to start at. What would be the take-homes from this? First, that demographically socioeconomic statuses do have the greatest impact on ACT scores. If you'll go back and look at this graph, race really didn't play much of a factor. Now, granted, once again, small sample size, but the blue band shows that African Americans, we have one African American student that finished with an exceptionally good score of a 24. And so, and then you also have white students that are of medium to high or socioeconomic statuses that are scoring relatively low at 16. So that points to, that to me points to the biggest thing, that socioeconomic status is going to be the impactful thing on our students' scores. Like I said, in race there was also a trend, but there were instances where race did not play a role. That was the blue band that I was talking about. All right, the third thing to take home, that the average calculated, I'm going to say, is not the best indicator of future student scores. If we go back and look, I calculated that out to be a 17.2, but if you'll notice, the graph is so skewed and so scatter plotted that it's going to be difficult to really get a good average saying, well, you know, our average is 17.2, so our students should be scoring this. So it's not a good predictor. So, what are we going to do about it? So, what I really tried to do was divide this up into three main parts. The first part would start at the classroom and pedagogy changes at that level. So, this is like the basis. The first thing we would do is impart meaning to the ACT. Many times, students that are coming from impoverished homes may not have the parental backup that you would really like to have a student to have in your classroom. And it's going to be one of those things that it's going to take time, and I think how you're going to fix that is by our next step, which is involve parents. If parents are on board with what is going on in your class, I think that environment will be much more beneficial. And so what would happen is during the mentor time, that would be our next step, you would actually be assigned a group of students, and you would contact those parents and try to develop a relationship with those parents along with developing the relationship with the students in your mentor time. The next thing is once you get those relationships established is you start making an ACT-based curriculum. Now, let me explain this very clearly. This is not a ACT prep class where you will just read out of a book that is dedicated to quote-unquote ACT prep. I do not think that would be very beneficial to those students. Instead, for example, in science or even agriculture, what you could do is every assessment or every activity that is uses a grade in the class that is a pretty serious grade, you would have a data section that mimics some of the standards required by the ACT. That way the students can practice this. Lastly, we have school-wide speakers and assemblies. Now, this sounds very generic, and I don't really want it to be. Instead, this would be situations where postgraduate students that would have graduated from the high school will come in and discuss how, what their socioeconomic background was within reason. Discuss a little bit more about, how school prepared them and where they're at now. Hopefully, this would be one of those situations where a student sees another student that maybe comes from a socioeconomic background like themselves, and possibly gives them a little bit of that inspiration to move on. And I know it's hard to move up out of poverty, but by involving parents, imparting that meaning to the ACT, and lastly, ensuring that those speakers and assemblies are meaningful to those students, gives them a little bit more of a motivating factor. All right, part two. Here, we're also going to look at the school as a whole changes. Now, what did I just say 2 seconds ago? This is not an ACT prep class. Well, here you're going to make one. Now, if this is not taught, I guess, to fidelity or in such a way where the students are still engaged, this is going to be a complete waste of time. This class has got to be meaningful for those students that are of our diverse backgrounds that we discussed earlier. So the teacher would have to use creative tactics and pedagogies that would allow them to keep that class interesting. And those are those four teachers that are trained on the ACT tactics. These have got to be your star teachers. These can't be teachers that you're just going to that an administration would just throw a bunch of students because they need to fill a gap. These have got to be your superstars, because if you just throw these kids into an ACT prep class, it is going to seem like you're throwing them into a prep class where they're going to be prepped, they're going to be bored, they're going to be lackluster engagement, and then their test scores are going to drop, and then you're going to repeat the paradox again. Pull that from the Page Paradox and read aside. It's a very great book that I would like to study at the high school. Lastly, small group instruction groupings. Small group is a very effective tool, especially with these students of diverse backgrounds. And the most important factor of that is you are able to get those relationships started. And so as you do this in the small group setting, you would make sure that you are targeting the students that need to have that intervention and help to help bring up those ACT scores. And once again, it goes back to the relationship. I know that Dr. Payne talked about that a lot in the book that we read. Is the relationship is the foundation of that change. And so that's what that small group is really going to be for, is building that relationship, but also ensuring that the students that need help are getting the help they need specifically. And all that would be data-based, and honestly, it's going to pull a lot from teacher observation. All right, lastly, this will be part 3. I got a typo right there I need to fix. But part 3, with the classroom, pedagogy, school, and lastly, that community changes. So after all that occurs, part 2, part 1 is all going to occur somewhere between the sophomore and junior year. All right, so after that initial junior year test, students that are identified, and how that would happen, that would be like a threefold identification step where you would look at their scores, their socioeconomic background, and also just their overall teacher observations and performances in school. And what you could do is you assign those students a mentor. Now, granted, I believe that every single student should have a mentor in high school, but I don't know if that would be feasible for this study. So This mentor is a little bit more than like a mentor time. Instead, this is going to be a one-on-one meeting that you're going to have at least once a week for 30 minutes with that student. This is where you're really going to make that relationship. This is where you really get to know that student, because you're going to really let the student get to know you. The other thing that would happen in this step is your administration would start to look at the diversity of the faculty. One of the things they could look at is not necessarily, oh wow, we've got a relatively not diverse faculty, I need to fire some teachers and hire some more. That's not what that's what I'm talking about here. Instead, you already have a diverse faculty. I know that was mentioned earlier on in the class, is that diversity is always present. We just got to figure out how to use it. And so that was really a big mindset shift for me. And I look at our teachers that I teach with on the hall, and we're very diverse, even though we might all come from the same basic socioeconomic status and racial background. It's a diverse group we have. And so the administration would need to start utilizing this by allowing the teachers to express their unique skills and characteristics of their teaching in such a way where it's beneficial to the class. All right, so the next thing, community leaders would participate in the mentoring program. So the mentor would actually contact community leaders, and this could be the mayor, this could be the police chief, this could be a pastor of a church, this could be just a important community member like a businessman or something that owns a business, to where whatever they bring to the table would be important for that student. And so if I have a student that's really interested in engines, I might could invite somebody from like a business in Piedmont like AgPro, where they service John Deere tractors and whatnot. And so I could really try to bring in mentors that are dedicated to the student. And then lastly, and this is one that surprised me, but I understand how it can be very effective. The administration would provide parental assistance programs to the parents, and this would be like job training. This would be like FAFSA, financial aid, collegiate prep materials, and things like that, where you could aid those parents in the lacking areas that they may have due to their socioeconomic status or just the situation they're in general. Housing help, any way to help the parent. Because once again, I want to go back to that very first part one. Involve the parents. If we can get parents involved, that's really going to provide a two-stage setup for support. Now, this plan is going to be very difficult to enact. It's going to take some dedicated faculty, but if you could utilize a plan like this, it is my belief that you would not only see an increase in ACT because of the increased value to it that you would place on those students. You would also see an overall improvement in the community, because the community is going to rally around the school. To be honest, at Piedmont, that's what we've tried to instill in our community. Now, granted, it's had good years, it's had bad years. We've used several different educational theories and cutting-edge educational practices to try to make our school the best school possible. And so, to close, I would like to say that some of those programs are working, some are not. But if you involve the parents and you involve the community and you get everybody on the same goal, the same path, which would be improving those students' ACT scores and improving those relationships with those students to show them that this is an important test that kind of is a gatekeeper to your collegiate future, if that's something you're interested in, then I think you could see a real improvement in the school. And I really think you'd see a big improvement in the community. So once again, thank you for allowing me to go through and explain the methods to my reasoning as to why this plan would work. And I appreciate it. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment back. And once again, thank you for tuning in.